I'm joined now by the author of What is a Girl Worth and former Sports Illustrated Inspiration of the Year Award recipient, Rachael Denhollander. Now, Rachael, you are trained as an attorney. You have a supportive family. You have everything going for you to speak and be believed. What about everybody else? What hope do other survivors have of being believed?
I think that's something we have to grapple with culturally. I think we have a lot of instances where people looked at my story, they caught the tail end of it, and there was this sense of Larry's demise was inevitable. And look what one person can do raising her voice. And that's a feel-good story. We like that. But the reality is it wasn't just one person raising her voice. I had to have that supportive family. I had to have that community. I had to have a detective who was passionate about the truth, and a prosecutor who wasn't going to let it go, and a judge who opened up her courtroom for justice. We had to have all those things. And I think one of the takeaways from this story is we need to do a better job putting those things in place so that survivors do have the support system they need. It's not right to keep saying to survivors and to little children, speak up, just keep speaking up, knowing the kind of damage it does when they speak up and they're silenced over and over again. It's our job to make it possible for them to speak up.
Why do you think people are so reluctant to believe the victim's story?
Partly because it's easier. It's easier if the person's mistaken or misinterpreted or is just lying. There's an aspect of self-protection, especially for women. You see this. If there can be something the survivor should have done differently, some way that they could have protected themselves or could have fought back, well, then that makes me safe because I would do it differently. I can keep myself safe. But there's also a dynamic of it would cost. If you're going to listen to that allegation and you're going to consider that this could really be true, it's going to cost you something. You're going to have to speak out against someone that you respected or that you liked. You may have to withdraw support from someone that you were supporting. And we don't like it when it costs. A little girl and a little boy isn't worth that much to us so much of the time.
What did it cost you? What was the cost to you to speak out? And so many times you had to do it.
It really cost everything. And again, that's something we need to grapple with societally. For a victim to speak out and to pursue justice and to file a police report, even if they don't have to disclose publicly, what they are forced to do is sit there and relive those most painful moments over and over and over again. You give up your privacy, you give up your dignity. I heard a great example one time where a teacher said to a classroom, describe your best sexual experience. Of course, there were no volunteers. No one wants to describe something that private in front of a group of people. It's private. Even the good things are private. So how much more difficult is it to describe the worst experience you've ever had? And to do it in that kind of graphic detail. You really have to give up everything. You are making a choice to become a pawn in the justice system. And the reality we know statistically is that out of every 1,000 rapes, only 5 rapists serve jail time. So the chance of getting justice is very low. And that's something that we need to change. We need to change how we engage the justice system, what our idea of justice is. Because more often than not, victims are barely surviving the system that we have in place right now, in part because of how we treat them societally.
So many people ask the cliche question of why it takes so long for a victim to speak up. Mm-hmm. You've spoken to that a little bit. 16 years went by before you made your first public disclosure of this. Is there any part of you that regrets waiting that long, or would you do it the same way over again?
I regret that I had to wait that long, and that's the way I would phrase it. Because it had to be the right dynamics in place for it to work. Because what we do know now, and what I was confident of then, is that there were women speaking up. There were children describing exactly what Larry was doing, and over and over and over again, they were silenced. And so I deeply regret that I and all of these women were in a position where we could not speak up, and we could not be heard. Look what it took to get a pedophile abuser who had abused hundreds of children just seen for what he was. There were about 5 different law enforcement agencies that were involved with investigating Larry. Only one of them handled it the right way. Only one detective did the right thing. Only one prosecutor was willing to pursue justice. And so, I grieve every day that it took that long, but that's not my responsibility. That's on everybody that surrounded the predator and kept him in power for decades.
When you talk about those institutions, and you address a lot of that in the book as well, I want to ask about USA Gymnastics. About a year ago, you did an interview and you said your daughter really wanted to do gymnastics, but you didn't want to let her because you didn't think there was enough in place. Is that still the case a year later, or have you seen them actually make some changes that you feel comfortable with?
Unfortunately, that is still the case. We are a year later, and people that were directly involved in covering up Larry's abuse, employees that were directly involved in removing medical files and evidence from the Corley Ranch, are still employed by USAG. Their two most recent appointees already had allegations of abuse against them in Safe Sport, and that wasn't enough to keep them from being appointed to be in charge of our medical coordination and our athlete safety. And USAG really has made it clear over and over again that they think they have a publicity problem. The survivors have created a publicity problem for them. If you cannot admit the problem, you cannot fix the problem. And that's where USAG is stuck. I don't want it to be that way. None of the survivors want it to be that way. But that's where it's stuck. And again, that's not our responsibility. That's on the leadership who continually refuses to do the right thing.
At what point does something like that actually cost them enough to make real changes? Are there people who are like you, who are saying, my kids are not going to participate? Is that something that's been happening?
Increasingly, yes. Yeah. There are more and more, and I think it really comes down to money, because that's what USAG has shown over and over again. They value the money. And so part of what we needed to start discussing is the sponsorships. Don't fund an organization that's complicit in child abuse, because what you're funding is the abuse of children. If you want to say you are an organization that supports women and supports children, make sure that you're putting your money where your mouth is.
I want to transition to a topic I haven't heard you specifically speak about, but one that immediately came to my mind when reading your story. The U.S. Supreme Court currently has a Justice, Brett Kavanaugh, who has been publicly accused of sexual assault by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. She testified, she told her story. He was still confirmed. What kind of message do you think that sends?
Yeah, I think the most damaging thing that we saw come from that was the instinctual cultural response that we had again. When Dr. Ford came forward with those allegations, she had therapy notes. She had evidence of the way her life had changed. She had prior disclosures. In many ways, she actually had more evidence than I had when I came forward, because I didn't ever seek the help of a therapist. I didn't have therapy notes. I didn't have those sorts of things when I came forward. And the immediate cultural response was, not possible. She's in it for money. She's in it for fame. She's in it because of the politics. Those are the exact same things that were said about me. Larry was running for school board when I came forward. The instinctive cultural response we had was one to attack the victim rather than to listen. And that was a devastating message to send to survivors, and a devastating message to send to perpetrators, that it's not going to matter enough for us to even listen.
How did you feel when you saw that happened?
I was heartbroken for her, because what she chose to go through to speak up was an incredibly traumatic process. And she opened up those therapy notes. She opened up how her life had changed and the things that she had to do differently because of the trauma. And no one cared enough to even listen, to even take it seriously. And culturally, again, we had instances where experts came on and they simply ignored all of the probative data that she had. We sent a message to society that it just doesn't matter enough.
How has this whole experience changed you?
I think it has made me more determined. It has made me more determined, even just to be faithful in the very little things. Because something I really saw as I went through the trial with Larry is, again, everybody got to see the backside of who Larry was. They saw what Larry had become. But Larry wasn't always that person. He didn't wake up one morning in his 20s and set out to be one of the worst pedophiles in recorded history. That decision came with every little decision he made, every excuse for why feeding his perverted desires were okay. Every time he chose to look at child porn, and excused it because he was tired or worn out or needed stress relief. And I think one of the things I've seen the most clearly is how the little decisions we make really set the trajectory for our lives, and we don't know at the time we make them how much impact they're going to have and what they're going to turn us into. And so it's made me very determined, more so than ever, to pay attention to those little decisions that I make and the trajectory it's putting me on, and to choose to do the right thing, even when it feels like it's just a little thing and it doesn't matter.
What is the one thing that that you never expected, the most unexpected part of this journey for you?
I think the relationships that I've gotten out of it. The people I was most afraid of in coming forward was the detective and the prosecutor, because I know as an attorney that's where it often breaks down. And now my daughter is named after the detective, and the prosecutor is one of my dearest friends. And so I think it's those types of things, seeing each person in their own role doing the right thing when they didn't know what it was going to become.
Rachael, thank you again for retelling your story, for being vulnerable, and for giving us your time today. Congratulations on the book, What is a Girl Worth? It's a powerful read. I hope everybody picks up a copy. It is on shelves now. Thanks so much, Rachael.
Thank you.